Welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. This is a show all about implanting hope in our hearts. I'm Bill Snyder, joined by my friend Ann DeSantis. We're glad you're here for our uplifting conversation about faith and how it sustains our hearts through all the seasons of life. Thanks for walking with us.
Hello, and welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast on Patchwork Heart Ministry on the Patchwork Heart Ministry YouTube channel. My name is Ann DeSantis, and you might notice that my co-host, the founder of Patchwork Heart Ministry, is not with us on this podcast. I want to make a shout out to Bill Snyder. He wasn't able to make it for this one, but we have an amazing guest for you this time around. We have Deborah Keefe. Thank you so much for joining us on the Sowing Hope podcast, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Anne, for having me, and for Bill for being in the wings, if you will, watching over. Just so excited to share the story of God's work in my life.
That's right. And we want to also make a shout out to a very good friend of Patchwork Heart Ministry, Kendra Von Esch, who introduced the two of us, or the three of us, I should say, so that you could be interviewed on the Sowing Hope podcast. Now, Deborah she is a licensed social worker. Her titles are MSW, APSW, and CLCE. So basically, she's got certifications both for social work and for coaching as well. Now, her website is DeborahAnnKeefe.com, and I would just highly recommend it for you to go to the website. She is an author, a counselor, and a musician. So tell us briefly, how did you have such a conversion to your faith?
Well, it's a very beautiful story of God, his desire to bring all of us into his most sacred heart in a very personal way. I know him as a God of love. I was raised Catholic and was blessed by that, to receive the sacraments, especially the Eucharist. My mother's mother, my grandmother, was very devout, had traveled to Lourdes. There was always, knew those stories of healing and the power of the waters, and a connection to our Blessed Mother. As I went through my teenage years, there was a wound in the family, and a divorce, and I didn't choose to leave the faith, but I didn't know how to apply it to, a difficult situation. And so I went off to college in Boston, a married Methodist. And, one of the things that's so important in my story is I have always loved God. No matter what church or parish I attended, I've always loved God. I always knew he was good. Always saw his blessings. My struggle was to understand his love for me. From that wound from my childhood, I somehow took responsibility for what went wrong, and had that self-blame. If I was better, then maybe this wouldn't have happened, or I could have fixed it, right? Ultimately, the more that you give to God, the more that he blesses you, and staying devoted to him through my own marriage and raising two lovely, gifted daughters. Again, our children show us God, don't they? As the birth of a child.
That's right.
I remember, right? When you hold that newborn, you're seeing God, and so it's this beautiful story of him continuing to come to me with his love. And unfortunately, through my own divorce, basically what happened is through divorce, and we didn't have the graces of the sacrament of holy matrimony. Ultimately, every marriage is the most beautiful and most difficult thing, I think, to people, can, commit to in life, and how important that is. We need the sacraments of holy matrimony, and unfortunately, not having that. I went through divorce, and a month later, my father died. And at my father's funeral, which was where I had received communion, was this statue of Jesus that I had looked at as a child. And there was my father's coffin, who he'd always remained devout Catholic. And Jesus, I could just hear Jesus calling me back to the Catholic Church, and that this was where the love was, this was where the Holy Family was, this was where the Blessed Trinity was, and I wanted to come back. So perhaps it was my father's parting gift. I actually at his wake, I was called to put my hand on his heart, and he had passed. It was perhaps 10 days later, and it wouldn't make sense biologically that it would be warm, but it was. And um and it was, that gift from the Father of love, goes beyond all time. I knew that my father in this, this very challenging time, he still loved me wherever he was, whatever was happening, whatever dimension, that the love that we shared still existed. It never ended. And it really was the love of God through my father, and that brought me back. And
Oh,
yeah.
wow, what a story so far. I mean, it sounds like you always had that love of God no matter what, but
Yeah.
he led you in a specific direction and brought you to where you are right now, which obviously is the best place, because the present
Yes.
moment always is, and
Right.
how God is working in your life. So
Right.
please do tell us more.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Yeah, when I came back, that first confession is always so powerful. And Father Maurice La Rochelle at Sainte Marie in New Hampshire, he said to me, he cried with me, because when we're separate, it wasn't, you know, is we're just missing out on the love of God, right? That's the sin separates us from God. And so the things that happen in our life, however, we're just not in his grace, and we're not receiving his love. So, I can't say enough about the sacrament of reconciliation. Is immediately, those graces happen. And I joined the choir, was my penance, because that all that I really needed was to be loved, to love and be loved. And love is a very powerful force, in the world. And then when I received the Eucharist, Jesus came to me personally, which and whispered in my ear that he loved me, and then the Eucharist really became his flesh. And I knew it was the real presence of God. And that has not stopped in the 15 years that I've been back. It's led through, so many different seasons, right? I've been so blessed by our faith, because have I always believed that, John 10:10, God is love and he wants abundant life for us. That the end of the story is not the crucifixion. The end of the story is Easter morning. It's the resurrection. Um, and it was the one thing I knew in my life, that I know my heart, when I love, when I love, and I love very deeply, I want that person to have joy. I want them to be filled with love, right? I don't, that's what love does. Love wants to encourage and support and build, and always wills the best of another. So in receiving that from God, allowing him to love me has been quite the journey. The battle isn't against anyone else. It's really against ourselves, I think.
Mm. I've
You
heard
know,
that before more than once, that whole idea, and I'll put it in air quotes, that allowing us to be loved is something
yeah,
very Catholic, and it is something true. And
yeah,
so you're up the right alley when you say that, in terms of ways that
yeah.
we can have better communion with God, right?
Yes,
That we
yes,
allow that, because his love is always undying and unending. And part
right,
of that, what blocks us, is the sin, right? And
right,
also just ourselves, right? Just ourselves.
Right.
And
Right.
so that is amazing. And thank you for sharing. Now, you have a beautiful website, as I said, and I do want to invite people to go to Deborah, and that has an H on the end, Deborah Ann, ANN, without the E, Keefe,
Yes. Yeah.
KEEFE.com. Go to the
Yes.
website and you will learn about her as an author, counselor, and musician. Now, you
Mhm.
also wrote a book called Canto Divina,
Yes.
and it is singing psalms for transformation.
Yes.
So tell us more. I mean, there's a whole lot to everything that you do. I'm looking at your full bio too, which I would like to read maybe in a little while. But tell
Yeah.
us about this book and tell us about the website.
Thank you. Um, there are many different seasons in our life. But there's always a common thread, I think, in our lives, and that common thread of faith and love, and music was part of that for me. And in order to serve God, um, being in good health, taking our bodies are the tabernacle of Christ, really, right? As we receive the Eucharist, we become, the Holy Spirit dwells in us, and so we have to take care of them. So that's been the golden thread, if you will, through my life. And I had noticed after teaching flute and flute choirs and voice choirs, performed with some orchestras and raised musical children, that there was something happening with music that really affected health and wellness. Um, you know, uh, Cognitively, spiritually, emotionally, physically. In 2011, I went for a master's in social work and did the research. And if I could, I wish I sometimes had a picture of the look on my face, because most musicians know this, that something profound is happening. But when you see it proven, and the research, in the knowledge database that this is being studied all over the world, what a moment, So ultimately, I completed 3 years full time, and as a musician, it was different because I understood how music worked. I was classically trained, had taught and performed for many years, and so as I read the science, the physics of sound, your brain on music, the Mozart effect, some of these, really classic foundational books, I was able to apply it with my faith very effectively. So basically, I built programs in oncology and hospice and home care. And I started seeing so many miracles, as David played the harp and cured King Saul's depression. I had this opportunity in my life to fully surrender to God. I said, please help me understand. You're teaching me, you're showing me profound works here and miracles. So I followed him, and he showed me. And ultimately is what ended up with creating Canto Divina. And that journey is quite a journey. But the highlight of it really was in the Diocese of Green Bay. My daughter Abigail was at Lawrence Conservatory. My daughter Naomi was in Pittsburgh at Point Park Conservatory, and the arts were, they were living the faith, living, the I taught God as the creator. The arts are such a great way to share a faith with, in a world that it's not always acceptable to, be faithful. So I talked a lot about the creator. So they were creating, and I knew they would, be okay. But while I was out there, I spent time at Our Lady of Champion, the National Shrine where Blessed Mother appeared, which I can't say enough, that the love and the mercy and the graces. Our Blessed Mother's there. She just, every time I've been there, I just feel her right there with me.
If I could just interject,
And
because our Bill Snyder, who is our, the founder of Patchwork Heart Ministry, it's his YouTube channel here.
yes,
He's a big fan of that the Our Lady of Champion, and I have not been there yet, but can't say enough good. I'm really excited to get there someday. Thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, you're welcome. I can't say enough. It's an absolute treasure. The walk to Mary is great. I highlight that. But she's there, she's present. And so ultimately what happened, the rector, Father John Broussard, was my spiritual director at the time, and I was writing the book, and there's quite a battle going on in my life. And he said, put the book on the altar and let's see what God wants to do. And ultimately, Christ came to me in the Eucharist at the shrine at a healing mass. He would bring the monstrance around to everyone there. He would take his time, and it was like the Eucharist became the sun, except it was limitless, and it was pure love. And even there's no word that does it justice. Even when you try and put a word, there's no word for it. It's just, the love of God is infinite. It's, beyond measure. I can't help getting choked up just thinking of it. It's for everyone, and it really was that journey for me of opening myself up, humbling myself to realize I would never be worthy of him, but only say the word and my soul shall be healed. Right?
Yes, yes. Oh, what a beautiful story. I'd like to
Yeah.
take just a minute or two and read your
Yes.
bio, because there's so much there for people to get to know you. I'm going to say your website again at the end, but your bio
Okay.
is Deborah Keefe is a Catholic therapist and a life educator, author of Canto Divina, which you just described a little bit about the book, Singing Psalms for Transformation, and the developer of the Music as Medicine Mentor Program. Deborah received her MSW from the University of New Hampshire with a focus on the application of music as medicine, and her BSBA from Boston University, summa cum laude. Congratulations, too. That's really an accomplishment. Deborah integrates her faith-based approach to healing and transformation through her classical music background. As an accomplished flautist, Deborah performed with the Cape Ann Symphony Orchestra, the Gordon College Flute Choir, and the New Hampshire Philanthropic Orchestra. Deborah is licensed as an advanced practical social worker. That's APSW in the state of Wisconsin. So,
Yes.
wow, you have done so much. And again, please go to that website. Talk about, if you could, just the role of music in your family's life, because you're mentioning your daughters, you're mentioning how this is not just an individual thing for you. This is something that's been passed down, right? Talk a little bit
Right.
about that.
Exactly. Well, we started the day, I did homeschool both my daughters, and they had times of being in a public or private school as well. But we started the day with the Bible and spiritual reading, and then an hour of music. So what music does, in the development of the brain is it creates neural pathways for connections in the brain, so that when new information is absorbed, it's absorbed much quicker. The connections are made to other parts of the brain, other, memories and thoughts, where the transition between one of the things I would see is the transition between one subject and another. So music is like a connector. So the transition between one subject and another can happen when the neurons know how to connect information more easily, which is part of what music does. So for instance, when you are studying a math concept and you connect it to something, music is very mathematical. It's logical, it's orderly. Everything about it is math and science based, the pitch, the frequency. And when you connect that information to something in the real world, whether you're doing a science project and it's gravity, the mind will process the information much quicker and more effectively because it has the communication pattern to make those connections. So music ultimately, immersing the brain in music opens up circuitry in the brain so that the brain can connect information and transition it to make it more effective and applicable to real life situations.
I love that ending
It's
part
profound.
because if you think about it, that's the end goal. Like,
Right.
anything to do with education, the end goal has to be application, right?
It has to be
So
application.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I think it's an amazing connection between music and, as you said, science, math, it's all goes together. And think about what good that does for young people, not just young people, though, older people too.
Right.
I know that it's a wonderful therapy for seniors and older adults. So
Right.
very, very good work
Right.
that you're doing. Now, is there
Right.
something going on that we're taping this in February of 2024? In fact, we are taping this right before Ash Wednesday. I'm not
Yes.
really 100% sure when it'll go live, but pretty soon after that. Is there
Yeah.
something going on right now in your ministry that you'd like people to know about during this year of 2024?
Right. Great. Thank you. All of this work and preparation has been to launch Canto Divina. So ultimately, I'm preparing to launch a ministry from the book, using music as medicine and the faith for healing and transformation in others. So basically, what I had learned from all of the different experiences in Wisconsin, when Christ came to me in the Eucharist, is what I learned is that God's divine healing love comes through his music. So when I received those healings, there was music and song going on. So singing is a very powerful, I think all the choirs of angels, heaven is 9 choirs of angels, and they're singing praises to God. And as we praise God, it becomes a vehicle of his divine healing love. So Canto Divina my goal is to teach others how to connect to that divine healing love of God through the baptism of the Holy Spirit, through the integration of music as medicine with the way we sing, the notes, the pitches, the rhythm of how we sing, and then to bring people through the Psalms, which of course is the heart of God, for healing. So we're Mike Aquilina and Anuzo and I are right now looking at dates to put the first retreat together. And then my goal will be to bring it out to the world and hopefully be invited into parishes to teach music directors and cantors how to use their gifts, their musical gifts, to actually be part of the healing and transformation of their parishes. So I want to make an army of angels, an army of Canto Divina angels. So it has to be launched first because it's much more than singing the Psalms. After my own personal transformation, the healing of my vision, my spine, the Lord has just healed anything I've brought to him. All I want is for others to receive this as well.
And I think those two words go together so well, healing and transformation. Who doesn't want that, right? Who doesn't want that? So if you're watching this podcast, please, I would just invite you to go to that website, DeborahAnnKeefe.com. Again, Deborah Ann Keefe, KEEFE.com. Go to the website. And again, I would like to thank Kendra Von Esch for the introduction to you. And we also send out our deepest condolences to her on the passing of her husband recently. I've been watching her podcasts and videos lately, and my heart goes out to her and her family deepest prayers, and those prayers will continue.
Yes.
Deborah, did you have any final words before we end this podcast?
Yes. Well, I'd like to bring up the Music for Medicine mentorship program I'm just launching as well is for anyone who's interested in learning how to use music as medicine to reduce anxiety, relieve depression, process grief and trauma, or wants to somehow find a way to increase the positive outcomes from an environment that they're working in, or event planning, because music, when you include music in any environment, whatever the event is, it will improve all the outcomes immediately. So I am offering this mentorship program as an individual, group, or corporate, to present at seminars. It doesn't there isn't like you really do prescribe music as medicine, because music has such an emotional component that I can't just create one playlist for one, for everyone. So it's a personal service I'm offering, and it's on my website. So my hope is to increase everyone's awareness of how sound can affect their mental, emotional, physical health, and improve quality of life. And ultimately to sing, as I am blessed to be filled with joy no matter what's happening. And I sing all the time, just even through COVID, one of the best things you can do for your respiratory system is to sing.
Yes, I've heard that. I've heard that. My
Yes.
daughter and I are in a choir for the university that we both attended. And yes, I'm familiar with that. So thank you so much for being a guest on the Sowing Hope podcast, Deborah. We'd love to have you back again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And on behalf of Patchwork Heart Ministry and Bill Snyder, as Bill always says, keep beating to those Catholic hearts. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sowing Hope on Patchwork Heart Radio. For more information about this podcast and our ministries, visit our websites, patchworkheart.org and anndesantis.com. You can also follow and interact with us on Twitter at PWH Ministry or Ann DeSantis 2.